Now, I'm going to start with what we already covered, and this is the one that you are most familiar with, is this thing called the diagnostic test. And I'm going to start this is what we covered. From this, we learn, and let me put some numbers also. Now I'm going to start with a bit of language. What we do is we describe these things using certain notation. And this is important for us to grow in our science. First question. If you randomly pick any one from this 1,000 people, what is the probability the person has the disease? Okay? Probability of disease. That must be 100 divided by 1,000. So we follow the notation, probability of disease is equal to 0.1. You see the notation? A probability within bracket of disease. This is called a marginal probability. What is it? A marginal probability, because it appears in the margin. And in marginal probability, the denominator is the total number of people. Can you see any more marginal probabilities? Probability without disease. Yeah. So I put it this way. Probability of D with a line on top, no disease. And that will be 0.9. Can you see any more marginal probabilities? That's right. Probability of test. And I didn't put the plus sign. Ideally we should, but I'm trying to reduce the material on the board, is equal to what? 0.27. And probability of test negative, you see, T bar will be equal to 0.73. Now that you have looked at the margins, now we'll go into the inside the cell and ask this question. And there are several ways of doing it. But for our purpose today, I'll stick to only one particular type of probability, and that is called a conditional probability. Okay, so this is called the marginal probability. And this is called the conditional probability. What is the probability a person who has this disease will be test positive? How will you calculate that? What is the probability a person with the disease? 90 divided by 100. Yep. And that is our sensitivity of the test. Okay? So sensitivity, I'm going to write, is equal to probability of test given disease, and is equal to 0.9. So in a conditional probability, you don't use the total number, use the marginal number. And the condition is specified. Given the person has disease, that is the condition, what is the probability the test will be positive? And that's what we call incidence. Sensitivity. So, what other kind of conditional probability you can think of? We like to look at specificity. Will be equal to probability of tests being negative given there is no disease. That's equal to 0.8. Can you see that? Given that the person does not have the disease, what is the probability? Can you see the notation clearly? I find it difficult to see. It's T bar, D bar. We can also create another conditional probability called positive predictive value, which is equal to probability of disease given test. That is equal to 0.33. Can you see that also? Probability of disease given test is positive. It's simply 90 divided by 270. Now our friend negative predictive value. Is equal to probability of no disease given test is negative. Is equal to 720 by 730. I can't calculate that. We have not learned anything new except to write what we have already known using a notation which comes under the whole concept of probability theory. And the aspect I keep talking about is that we use a lot of a theorem by an old priest called Bayes, and it's called Bayes' theorem. Not very popular among general medical students or college faculty, but extremely fundamental in nature and really when you go into research. So this is going to be an introduction to this concept of Bayes' theorem. Now, I got these numbers and I got these kind of thing, and I'm going to venture into presenting to you what Bayes wrote down, okay, many years ago. I will not justify, but you can later on check out whether the numbers tally. I'm going to write down the equation. Probability of disease given test is equal to probability of test given disease. You see, this is a mirror image. Probability of disease given test is equal to probability of test given disease times probability of disease divided by probability of test. That is what Bayes' theorem was, a fantastic invention. And I'll explain to you why it is important. But for the time being, just put the numbers and calculate and see, am I telling the truth? And I suggest that you use these already calculated numbers to justify it. Or you can use your actual number. This is t, so you want to calculate d given t. You start with the t given d. 90 by 100 times probability of d, 100 by 1000, divided by probability of t, 270 by. So you get, and the answer is correct? 0.33. Old man Bayes was right, and that is his theorem. But now look at the structure of the theorem, and suddenly you realize, I have a brilliant situation here. When I sit in my hospital, I see patient coming with heart attack, and I ask the question, do you smoke? And after some time, I say, of the hundreds people whom I talked, 80 said yes. So probability of smoking, given heart disease, is 80%. But then that doesn't help me. What do I want to know? I want the other way around. Probability of heart disease given smoking. Because that will tell me, is smoking a risk factor? To get that switch, I can use this equation. That's why Bayes' theorem became extremely popular, because it deals with a conditional probability, and you can calculate the mirror image provided you know this and this. Okay, so far, anything, no problem? Everything makes sense, right? All right. Now, I have a difficulty with this equation. I can figure out probability of disease from my clinical knowledge, but I can never figure out probability of test. If you go there, unless I have 1,000 people who have done a test and I can look at the data, here I know it because I've given the data. But in real life, a patient comes with the test positive. How do I know what is the probability of test? It's a figure we can't get unless you have finished a large survey. So I want to get rid of it from the equation because I can handle this. What is this? This is sensitivity. I know sensitivity. I can figure out clinically what the probability of disease is, but I can never know what is the probability of test. So I want to get rid of it. Now I am tempted to take a duster and rub it off, but that's not allowed, right? So I write one more equation. What is the ultimate motive? To get rid of this chap. So I'll write down probability of no disease given test is equal to, I'm starting equation. Probability of no disease given test. What the heck is that? That's right. Test is positive, but it's false. So we are talking about, that's right. But doesn't matter, but I want you to finish the equation on your own. I'll write it, but you try to finish it. Will be equal to the mirror image, probability of tests given no disease, time, probability of no disease, divided by probability of test. You must be wondering where the hell this guy is going, right? Okay. Now, have you got it written down? Now, next step is I'm going to divide number 1 with number 2. When I divide like that, first thing that happens is probability of T and probability of T disappear. Hey, that is great. So let me rub it off because I'll run out of space. Now I can divide the other two things. What am I going to divide? This by this and this by this. Right? So probability of test given disease divided by probability of test given no disease times probability of disease divided by probability of no disease is equal to this. Probability of disease given test divided by probability of no disease given test. Write it down, check it out. If everything is right, we are in good shape. Don't worry, those ugly looking fellows, we can tame them. Actually, we take the equation and talk to them. Ask, who the hell are you? So we'll take the simplest looking fellow. Probability of D divided by probability of no D. What is that? You are taking the probability of disease divided by probability of no disease. Huh? What is that? So when you say, what is the probability of disease? Is 10%. Here you are saying, probability of disease divided by probability of no disease. That is 1 by 9. What is that? I'm going to put an equation, P divided by 1 minus P. That's what you're looking for. And do you know what that is? That is called odds. Odds. If you take a die and throw it, the probability of getting a 6 is 1 by 6. What probability odds of getting a 6 is 1 by 5. Why that? One way you can get it, 5 ways you can't get it. Odds is a way of measuring chance, a legitimate way, but it is P divided by 1 minus P. All right? Now, in the case of dice, how did I calculate it? Probability of getting a 6 is 1 by 6. Probability of not getting a 6 is 5 by 6. So, if you divide this by that, it's equal to 1 by 5. So, P minus 1 by P is the odds. So the equation, we don't have the probability of disease, we have odds for disease. Odds for disease is your equation here. Odds and probability keep coming in today's classes again and again, and the whole case control design is based on odds. Okay? So you better know this a little bit. And I'll also tell you one more thing. Odds is equal to P divided 1 by P, but probability is odds divided by 1 plus odds. So, we have mastered this. Now, can you give me what this is? Probability of T given D. Probability of test given disease. Sensitivity. So this is sensitivity. Our friend, we know this guy. What about this? That requires a little more sharp thinking. Probability of tests being positive when there is no disease. Here is there's no disease, but the test is positive. This is equal to 1 minus specificity. Are you with me? That equation is equal to 1 minus specificity. Let's look at specificity. We have already calculated it. 0.8. That is specificity. This is 1 minus specificity. You have understood? I'll give you time. Watch it, look at it, and be convinced, because if you don't understand this, you won't understand the next step. What is this? Probability, given that you don't have a disease, probably you will be test negative, is this 80%. Probability you will be, given that you don't have disease, probability of test will be 20%. So 100 minus 80%, or 1 minus 0.8. That's what I'm talking about. So this is sensitivity, this is 1 minus specificity. What it says is, if you multiply this with this, you get this thing. Now what the hell is that? Okay? Can you walk with me on that? This one is probability of disease given T. What is that? This is the positive predictive value. What is this?
No disease in positive test.
Yeah. This is 1 minus positive predictive value. Okay? 90 by 270 is positive predictive value. 1 minus that is 180 by 270. That's also odds. That means odds for disease given test is positive. Not probability, odds for disease. The top is probability and below is 1 minus probability. So I can now rewrite this whole equation using a new kind of a formula. Post-test odds for disease. This is not post-test probability. It is not positive predictive value. It is the post-test odds, because you are dividing post-test probability with 1 minus post-test probability. So post-test odds for disease is equal to, this is what? This is odds for disease. Pre-test odds for disease. Pre-test odds for disease times this fellow, which is sensitivity divided by 1 minus specificity. And that fellow has got a special name, and the name is likelihood ratio. So, have you got that? Pre-test odds for the disease. You have to work in odds because we did the calculation to get rid of probability of test, no? So that's why we are working in odds. But remember, once you calculate in odds, you can use this equation and get back the probability, which we all understand. Odds, we have a problem understanding. All right. In walks a patient with fever, and I examine him, ask him questions. I told you this story yesterday, and now I know he probably has typhoid. Okay, so how is the probability? Because he's got a soft splenomegaly, a relative bradycardia, and he has got coated tongue, and his profession, and his eating habit, I think he's got a 50% chance he's got typhoid. Because somebody has already done his malaria test that was negative. So now I'm fairly convinced a 7-day fever must be typhoid. So I start my equation. I write down my pre-test odds for disease, which is 0.5 divided by 0.5. Did you get that? Pre-test probability divided by pre-test probability. So I got an odds. The pre-test odds for disease is 1. See, mathematics can be very simple. Okay. Now multiply by that my likelihood ratio. Now likelihood ratio for Vidal. Vidal approximately has a sensitivity of 90%. And approximately has a specificity of 90%. So what would be the likelihood ratio? So what will it be? Point? No. No, let's calculate. Sensitivity is 0.9 divided by 1 minus 0.9 is equal to 9. Is anybody disagreeing? No, better not. Okay, so I multiplied that. Is equal to 9. What is that? That is the post-test odds for disease. It is not post-test probability. It is not positive predictive value. It is only a post-test odds. Now I want to convert it back to probability. Odds divided by 1 plus odds is equal to 9 by 10. That is 90%. So now I'm 90% sure, certain, this guy has got typhoid. Every diagnostic test, you are supposed to do that. That's the way a clinician mind is supposed to work. So you can't remember everything. But which fellow is the most important chap in as making sure you have a large likelihood ratio? Because you have a large likelihood ratio, your post-test probability will be very high. And what decides likelihood ratio? It is the specificity more than sensitivity. Because if you have 99% specificity, your denominator is going to be 0.01. So your likelihood ratio can climb 90, 900. So diagnostic tests become useful if you treat it the right way that you should do. So long ago, I remember one of my youngsters, they were sitting in a cafeteria and talking. You know, JP doesn't know all that much medicine, but he is awfully lucky in guessing, okay? He's right. Exactly. Clinicians are guessing all the time, but not guessing just like that. Guessing based on probability. And that is the art of clinical medicine. So somebody came and complained, he was bad-mouthing you. And I said, you should congratulate him. He found the secret of my clinical skill. It is the guessing. But guess using science. It's called scientific guessing. Have you ever heard of it before? No. So, what have we learned today? We have learned that there's something called odds. Odds is probability divided by 1 minus probability. And in mathematically, sometimes it's more convenient to work with odds than probability. Especially when you want to get rid of unnecessary terms and number one. Number two, we have to remember that the relationship between pre-test probability and post-test probability is decided by a combination of sensitivity and specificity, both for the positive predictive value and for negative predictive value. I'm not going to touch upon negative predictive value for a simple reason. Many years ago, a very famous statistician, when he wrote his book, made a small error in the equation. And what did everybody do? They all copied it. And what did others do? They copied them. And everybody copied them. And this error stuck. So the likelihood ratio for a negative test is in a mess. You understand what I'm saying? It's a simple error. Simple, but made by a great man. If a great man makes a small mistake, it stays forever. But between you and me, I'm going to tell you what is the correct likelihood ratio for a negative test. Don't tell anybody. Keep it to yourself, okay? And that likelihood ratio, this is for a negative test, okay? In the negative part, that is when you're trying to rule out disease, you look for negative predictive value. And there the rule is post-test odds for no disease is equal to pre-test odds for no disease times likelihood ratio of negative test. That likelihood ratio of a negative test is equal to specificity, specificity divided by 1 minus sensitivity. That's simple. Okay. But don't fight with anybody. Follow the book, all right? But it's ugly. You get the answer finally, but this is much more neater. But I won't develop it because it's the same logic. You can sit and figure it out. Yeah.
In this previous equation, for post-test odds for disease, we calculated pre-test odds for disease 0.5 into 0.5. So how?
0.5 divided by 0.5. See, the languages, I ask myself as a clinician, what is the probability this guy has got typhoid? And my clinical mind tells me it's about 50-50. In probability term, it's 50%. In odds form, it's 1. That's all.
Usually considered one.
Not always. Another guy will come and with another fever, and say, this doesn't look like that. So I'd say very low probability. Whenever we see a case in the hospital, we finally come to a clinical diagnosis. And most of the time, it's spot on. I had to have a professor who was I was an intern under him. The guy, every time, had a diagnosis. But his chart had only diagnosis, nothing else. How we came to the diagnosis, he won't write. That will drive us nuts. Okay? And that is the problem with some of the good clinicians. They won't tell you why they come to that conclusion. But if you write it properly, you will get most often a reasonably good diagnosis. That is all clinical medicine. But that's where the test, nowadays there is a tendency, you take a slip of paper and tick for all tests. And the test comes positive, he's got this. That doesn't work. It is a bad clinical practice. All right, good. So in a way, we are testing a hypothesis. Okay, it's somewhat similar in logic to the diagnostic test we are looking at. The point is this. When we ask a question, does this vaccine work? We are seeking truth. And who knows the truth? Only God Almighty. So, we put truth on top. We don't know. The truth may be, yes, the vaccine works. Yes, the drug works. Yes, there is an association between smoking and lung cancer. So all those is one group of answers. But there is opposite also. No, doesn't work. So there is no. This yes and no can also be seen from a study point of view, from the investigator point of view, as a different angle. The investigator comes with a null hypothesis. And null hypothesis always is no. The opposite of null hypothesis, yes, drug work. But this truth only God knows. That is the problem. So our little investigator does a study. And he may come out with the feeling, yes, this drug works, or no, it doesn't. Here, the person rejects the null hypothesis. Here, the person accepts the null hypothesis. Okay? Now, it gives you these 4 columns. Just like in every other place. You give epidemiologist anything, he'll convert into a 2x2 cell. Okay? Now, if you are an A, then the truth is it works. And you found out it worked. There is joyful noise in the heavens. My son, my daughter has discovered the truth. Okay? Similarly too, if you are here, you have found the truth. But then, supposing you are here, that is, you are saying, yes, the drug works, but actually it does not. That means you are making an error. And we call that type 1 error. And if you have some Greek connection, you can also call it alpha error. Okay. Both are same, synonymous. Similarly here, When you say, hey, this drug doesn't work, but in fact it works, then you're making a type 2 error or a beta error. The question is, how do you know whether you are here or here? On the contrary, when you say there is no association, how do you know whether you're here or here? The truth is, you will never know. But all is not lost. You can calculate the probability of you making a type 1 error or you making a type 2 error. And if that probability, using that you can decide, it's okay, I think I'm comfortable with this. In other words, when you say, yep, this drug works, you look at the probability of a type 1 error, yeah, it is there, it's small enough, I can handle it. Okay, I won't go to jail. Similarly, the other one. So this is the design under which we work. But what I want you to remember is this. Now, this is stuff that is a little tricky. Look at this way. This is something similar to our diagnostic test. Disease present, disease absent. So this A actually is a true positive. And this one is true negative, false negative. So here we don't use that word sensitivity and all. We call 1 minus beta as power of the study. What does the power mean? Assume the drug works. First, then, if you do a study, what is the probability you will find that truth? For example, if you think the drug works and you organize, let's say, 100 studies, will all the 100 show statistically significant? May not. So that means you will be making a few cases, few studies will go into this area. So that is the notion. You can never trust that you'll always find the association which exists. You try to minimize this. Okay? This is even more tricky. This type 1 error, we call it like that, is something like 1 minus specificity. 1 minus specificity. That is, if given that there is no association, what is the probability you will wrongly conclude there is an association? Okay, and that is what we use. Okay. When you develop a little more advanced statistics, then you will know that is not a good way to do it. Why? Because what you really want to know is not 1 minus specificity. What you want is to know what is 1 minus positive predictive value in this direction. And that's what most people calculate. But in practicality, we don't do it. We do a t-test and this thing which gives you this in this direction. Given there is no association, if the null hypothesis is true, what is the probability of creating a error? But that works all right in clinical trial. Now listen to this word carefully. That works all right in clinical trial because generally in a clinical trials, you are allowed to do a clinical trial only if you have got a clinical equipoise. What is the meaning of the word clinical equipoise? What do you think? Clinical equipoise. Either way. In other words, your pre-test probability, pre-study probability that the drug works is 50%. Given that This mechanism is fine. But, you know when it breaks down? The moment you start doing subgroup analysis, within group analysis, your pretest probability is short. And then you had actually calculate the other way around, which is a bit more complex we will go into, but there is a method, and that will tell you what is the actual probability you're working with. And that is a problem with clinical trial. Now, a lot of people take the clinical trial data because the computer is so fast, because you know statistical analysis, you're subject to all kinds of analysis, and suddenly a few p-values come. He goes to town saying, I found that. Where is my Nobel Prize? Okay? So that is the problem with people. So the rigor of clinical trial is based on the fact you start with the point of clinical equipoise where the pre-study probability of success is 50%. And then this works all right. Understood? Okay. Now we go into the cohort study, case control study. Wow. There the pre-study, yeah.
Mentioning on this question, which error is more difficult or more dangerous?
Gosh. All errors are bad. Okay. Now this question comes up. Now, generally, we keep. Now, I'm going to answer you the expected answer, okay? You know what I am supposed to tell you. I'll tell you that first. In general, we keep 0.05 as a type 1 error. This originated from clinical trials. Why 0.05? Because most drug controller board want to have a discipline available. A pre-study probability of 50% chance that drug works, 1. Number 2, type 1 error of 0.05. So before you go to the drug controller, you satisfy these things. They are comfortable because scientifically the 0.05 works both ways. This way and this way. All right? So 0.05 got stuck. Why not 0.06? The controller said, no, you go back and repeat the study till you get 0.05. Because the world knows 0.05 is a god, so you have to worship it. Now, he's a dummy actually. It's not even the right probability to calculate. But that has become a regulatory thing. But type 2 error, we usually keep it as 20%. And the justification given is, if you say, yeah, this drug works, and you start using it, and it is wrong, you will be creating trouble. If you say the drug doesn't work, and don't start using it, nobody gets hurt, right? So a little larger error is allowed. Not true, that's not a good idea. You know? But the problem is sample size. Again, the regulatory body looks at the sample size. Whenever you say 0.05 and 0.2, they are happy. So that is the least sample size. If you try increasing the power and reducing the type 2 error, the whole thing becomes a mess. All right? Now, we got 20 more minutes to coffee time. I want you to bear with me and go through this task. I'm frightened, but I'm going to do it, okay? Because so far you've done well. You've managed to look at the Bayesian approach. We have looked at the power this thing. Now I'm going to say something different. I'm going to tell you the entire statistical analysis that we do is extremely simple. What you take is 2 groups and you look at them and study, is there a difference between them? And if the difference is large enough, then you say drug works. If it's small, you say drug doesn't work. Who decides big or small? Statistics. And how does that work? We start with a null hypothesis. Actually, drug doesn't work. Everything is by chance. Huh? We heard that line before, chance. In chance, that means you can quantify things, you can measure things, and then ask the question, does chance alone explain this, or something else is there? And that's how you go. So you got a little difference between the two. I call that D. What is the D? D is the difference between the two treatment groups. And what do? Very simple. You divide that by standard error. Standard error of difference. All statistical tests are in that little equation. Okay, they come in all shapes and sizes, but this is what they try to do. And then you get an answer. And we call it Z. We call it Z. What is it? Z is a kind of an area under the curve. Now I showed you this much will be 34%, this much will be 95%. Okay, now what is the x-axis? Is all Z's. Z0 onwards, it goes all over the Z's. Z talks about the area, and if you have a statistic book, it tells you for every value of Z, how much area is outside. So if you take 1.96 and 1.96 here it will be 2.5% area, 2.5% area. And that means the probability of this much difference occurring purely by chance is less than 5%. 2.5 plus 2.5. So that is how that thing works. So if you're not familiar with it, pardon me, and you'll need a little book to check what my Z is. But I told you about 1.96, and the Z is the answer here. Today, I'm feeling bright, so I'm not using 2, I'm using 1.96. That's what statisticians love. So, your study, when you start, you already know the answer. What is the answer? You want 1.96. And then you start manipulating all these things. Okay. What do you manipulate? The D. Can you manipulate D? No way. That's a real thing. What the D comes. So you do all the searching and trying. I hope the D is 10%. But from a clinician point of view, a clinician will tell you, listen, if the difference is not this much, I don't care what your drug is. So from that point of view, you can, practically you say, if there is a difference is so much, then I want to find out. So the D we can figure out. Now standard error is the fellow below it. The standard error, I already showed you the equation. Let's take a drug works not, protects not. I told you the standard error is PQ by N. P is probability. But here, there are two groups, P1 and P2, two outcomes. So what happens? We have got to accommodate both of them. P1, Q1 plus P2, Q2 divided by. And this is the equation we have for standard error. I am going to shorten it. I'm going to add P1 and P2 divide by 2, I'll get an average P. Q1 and Q2, I'll get an average Q. N1 is equal to N2. Wow, I reduced this whole ugly equation to something very simple. Now, I can make sure my study size is just right. So I get the answer 1.96. Did you believe that we actually cheat like that in our studies? Yeah, we fix it. It's practical. It is not cheating. Okay, it's sensible approach. Otherwise, you won't know how much to study. So now, to get the n out, we have a problem. Why? The square root is sitting there. And I showed you, whenever you find a square root, just take a duster and rub it off. And there you are. But then this becomes squared and this becomes squared. That's not bad. Now you are in a shape to take out this n. And n is equal to 2pq by d square into z alpha. We got a sample size calculation. All right? That is the sample size that you are going to have. Except there's a problem here. Let's say I'm going to believe there will be a 10% difference between the two groups. What is it? 10%. I am fixing the whole equation so I get 1.96 if 10% actually is the difference. And let's also assume, surprise, surprise, the truth is 10%. Okay? However, when you do the study, chances are you may not get exactly 10%. You may get 10.1% or 9.9% or 10.2% or 9.8 or 11% and 9%. Hey, this D is like a pendulum which can move either way. Normally, without any manipulation. So you have to take care of that. So what happens? This particular equation has a power of 50%. Half the time it will tell you your drug works. Half the time it will be, say, won't work. Why half the time? Because half the time value will be 10 or more, half the time will be less than 10. So you're walking into a study having created a trap where half the time you will get a right result and half the time you'll be making type 2 error. So what do you do? Be smart, add a little more number, and we have a system by which you do that. We add a term for beta error called Z beta. And that creates the whole problem is solved. Sorry, here. Z alpha plus Z beta square. Now this works much better. What is the type 1 error? 0.05. For that, you have to give a value of 1.96. Type 2 error, usually 20%. You give a value of 0.84. Okay? Your calculation of sample size is there. So any clinical trial you want to do, all you need to do is have extremely involved consultation on D. Don't take that lightly. That is the most important one. The rest can be fixed. You actually fix it, provided this is clinically important. Okay, now I'm going to give you a task. It's a difficult task. Supposing you want to do, after the study, I want to calculate the power or type 2 error. Can you redo the equation? That is, from this equation, can you take out Z beta and write Z beta equal to, try that. I'll give you a clue. To do that, first you have to get rid of this square. Right? That means what happened? This will have become D. So you should get something like Z beta is equal to all right? Now, when you get that, the answer, if it is 0, you have to go to that table I told you. If the answer is 0, that means you have 50% power. So this side is error, type 2 error. This side is power. If you get a 0, it is 50% error, 50% power. Suppose you get 1, let's say it's 1. You remember this is 34%, so this is 16% error and 84% power, and so on and so forth. So you can look at the table and put the point there, and then see what is the error, what is the power. But if you get a minus sign, you are below 50%, don't proceed with the calculation. You are hopelessly off target. Now, this equation is used for various D's and various N's so that you can say, you call what is called power line in preparing your protocol. Saying even if the D is a little less, do I have the power? So on and so forth. This one. So what we have in statistics book is a little picture like that and tells you this whole table is on standard normal deviates. And it comes from this. And it's like there are many ways you present it. But for example, some start pretending they're going like this, like this, like this, like this. And they keep changing the Z and keep talking about the area. Okay? Some are two-tailed. So they simultaneously ask for both sides. In a power calculation, you should always take a one-tail test. Okay? That's important. For beta, it's always one tail. Now, what it does is, to get the area, the standard normal curve, right? We discussed some part of it. One standard error will cover here 34 and here 34. So if it is one standard, the answer comes as 1. This is where you are, 1. You're asking what is the beta. Beta is at 1. Okay? Remember here we added a term 0.84. That is beta is 1. And if it is 1, this part of it, the area is 16%. So the remaining will be 84%. 0.84 comes here. If you get 0.84, that area would be 20%. This will be 80%. So you can look at the table and fix your point and then ask the question, how much is beyond, how much is this side? Okay, so we have actually learned a basics of statistical analysis, how to calculate sample size, how to calculate type 2 error and power. In terms of kind of a complexity, observational designs are tough to design, interpret everything, because clinical trials are fairly straightforward. If I were to design a clinical trial, I'll design it and find a manager. What kind of manager will I put there? A manager with no sense of humor, don't think too much, okay, nitpicking, petty all the way, making sure every bit of data is entered. Okay, person you would never want to call for a party, that is the perfect manager for a clinical trial. The rule is don't think, do, follow instruction. That is clinical trial. Okay? Observational design different. It has become a little more complicated that way. So let's try. Now, under observational designs, you all know the design. We have basically the cohort, case control, cross-sectional, ecological, and there are some vague designs like space-time cluster studies, familial aggregation studies. But just say one word about ecological studies. Now I would like to ask a question. Can you tell me what ecological study is? And one of you should answer, kindly. And if it's wrong, I'll shout out, wrong answer, okay? It gives me great satisfaction doing that. All right? What is ecological study? Answer confidently. You don't want to make me feel satisfied? Yeah, say. Ecological study.
The data may not be at the individual level.
Beta may not be?
The information collected is not at the individual level, or unit of study could be given area.
Unfortunately, she didn't give me the wrong answer. So I can't say wrong. She did correctly. But most people say it's about ecology, environment. Ecological studies are something like this. There are no subjects. They actually use aggregate data. I'll show you one study. It was done long ago. This is from India. They used 2 pieces of information on every state of India. Okay, 2 pieces. One is infant mortality rate, and the other one is maternal literacy rate. The x-axis is maternal literacy. And this is IMR. And each state contributed 1 point. And what does it show? With increasing literacy, infant mortality comes down. And here is Kerala with high literacy and a very low infant mortality. Now this, don't have children, don't have mother, we have aggregate data collected. It's an excellent thing for hypothesis generation. And it's easy to do these days because the internet is full of information. You can all kind of aggregate data, and at least for fun, you should do it. But because you may unearth something very interesting. I'll show you one more. This is done in Europe. Percentage Protestant. Do you understand? Not prostitute, Protestant. Percentage. In a community, there are Protestants and Catholic. This is also Protestant. And suicide rate. Wow. With increasing percentage of Protestant, suicide rate went up. Thereby suggesting that Protestantism, do you understand what Protestantism? Encourages suicide. Right? Yeah, you'll sound suspicious. Yeah, you should be suspicious. Because we don't know who is committing suicide. With increasing number of Protestants, the Catholic may be committing suicide. You understand? So the conclusion from this sort of study is sometimes can be erroneous. But this design has produced very Barker's hypothesis. Have you heard of that? That all came from examining ecological study. And it doesn't cost you any money. You don't need a budget, nothing. You sit there and figure it out. So I would encourage you to grow in science through doing ecological design. Now I'll tell you about a cohort study. You all know this. A cohort is a group of people with some common experience. Okay? Some define a common experience. And I once had a very bright idea. My impression was, I do a lot of deliveries. Many of them I used to use forceps and suction cup. And my worry was, my goodness, are these babies safe with this instrumental delivery? Or will they go to school? Will they have learning defect? That was my study hypothesis, that forceps or instrumental delivery causes learning defect in children. So how do I do that? I sit outside the labor room or get data from every mother who undergoes delivery. There is forceps delivery and normal delivery. And the forceps delivery is my target. Okay, and I enroll them. But remember, we learn without a comparison group, you can't do anything. So you'll have a normal delivery group to compare. Now what do I do? If I start the study on 2010, I cannot immediately get the result. I'll wait for 2015 when children go to school. And then I can use some kind of instrument to measure is there any learning defect. But I'm a patient man, so I'll wait. Now this is a cohort design because there is a defined exposure factor, that is what is called as a forceps instrumental delivery, and there's a group of them having the same shared experience, and I'm following them up, comparing with a group who also came out to the world same time, but using a normal delivery. Perfect. Neat design. So one youngster came and said, Dr. JP, what kind of studies are you doing these days? So I told him, this is my brilliant idea. He listened to me wide-eyed. And you know what this rascal did? He went and checked the data or records of 2005. And there he found out who had instrumental delivery, who had normal delivery. He quickly went to the schools and finished the study. Now 2010. And he met me and a bright smile said, I finished it actually. This is the results. That's fine. Never expose your brilliant ideas to anybody. But the point I want to get across, this I said is a cohort design. What kind of design is that? Will you say that line again for me? See, I didn't repeat it. That particular word, what's it again? Is a dirty word. Okay? Because it got so misused in epidemiological literature. To the extent possible, it has got all kinds of meaning. And in one time, MGR University banned any, what is the word? Study. Okay. Now, none of the people who are written textbook epidemiology ever called that design. That's right. So I don't use that word. I hope I have driven you to the point that become dead. So I'm going to name this what is called a concurrent cohort study. This is a historical cohort study. Both are cohort designs, but here you are using secondary data. Okay? And this you are using primary data. Now, where I come from, in CMC, we follow up 100,000 population. Have been from 1984 or something like that. And you have all kinds of information. What information? Birth weight onwards, you name it, information is stored. Now this becomes a repository. Children are born, people die, we get information, cause of death, whole lot of stuff. But the stuff in the computer is no use unless somebody studies it. So I personally encourage historical cohort studies if the center has a good repository of information. Okay. Now what we are not following up any cohorts. We have got a population under follow-up. But hidden there are many cohorts. Somebody put them up together. For example, somebody wants to study, does birth weight have anything to do with tendency for diabetes later in life? Barker's hypothesis. So they came to us, do you have children born 30 years ago whose birth weight is known? Oh yeah, and we have the address, we know where they live. Thank God. Otherwise, what he has to do is, he has to recruit them in the cohort form and wait for 35 years. So cohort studies, unless you have a good life expectancy yourself, you'll never be able to do it. This is great stuff. Okay, but the principles are same. So that is how it. And finally, you calculate the same thing. Incidence of the problem in exposed, incidence among unexposed. You divide one by the other. And relative risk. But after having said that, I should allude to the first cohort study, to my knowledge, which was very important. I mean, other studies have been there. This guy did on London drivers and London conductors and drivers. He looked at their, fashion like this, mortality. And you know what he found? The drivers had a much higher mortality than conductors. This study was done in 1940s, okay? Or maybe 50s, I may be mistaken, very early. Now, what would you conclude from this study? Why are the drivers having a higher mortality?
Occupational hazards. It's related to something occupational hazards while driving the vehicle.
He says the driver causes a whole lot of accidents and they die. Isn't it? That's fine. Next. Any other idea?
Posture. Drivers are always sitting, conductors are standing.
He says it's all a matter of physical activity. Conductors are not standing. Conductors are walking. This is the old London conductor where they have to go up, ticket. Nowadays there is no conductor anyway. But that's what that guy concluded. This is because of physical activity. In fact, I mentioned this study. This is the first study, from my knowledge, where somebody connected mortality and physical activity. But where did he get the bright idea from? I don't know. Well, to simply, if you sit for a long time, you may have a higher mortality. So it is not the walking is preventing death, sitting is causing death. How do you know that? We can't figure it out. It may be something else completely. He is inhaling fumes of gasoline because sitting near the machine. That is clearly causing problem for him. So there are hundreds of other things that could be there. So the problem in observational design, not only cohort, case control everywhere, you have a problem. There will be huge number of confounders. In clinical trial, how do you overcome confounding? Randomization. Can you randomize here? No. In a cohort study, there is no way. So difficult to do that. So you have to document and get. But where will you get the data from? I said historical cohorts are great. So what we are attempting in CMC is to create a large database from which you can keep drawing this kind of a historical cohort, but not always possible. But if the data is there and you don't use it, that's also a sin, because you should make use of it. Everybody is collected carefully and kept, and why don't you use it? But conclusions, you should be cautious. All right? Now, I'll come back to that in a moment, but I'm going to tell you suddenly about case control study. Practically every one of you have heard of case control or read a case control study. You know how it works? I'll show you how it works. I'm going to take an example of a study where the exposure factor is coffee drinking and the outcome is cancer pancreas. Now, I chose cancer pancreas because it is not a politically sensitive one, okay? I can't be blamed for being sexist or something like that. Everybody has a pancreas. So I've chosen that. The second reason is that some epidemiologist did a study on cancer pancreas. And you know what he found? Coffee doesn't cause any problem, but decaffeinated coffee does. That was funny, right? Well, he dared to publish it. And people started laughing at him because how can that happen? It's possible, I suppose. But this is the problem with observational study. You may find p-value significant all over and you will run after it. But when you do the investigation, case control is a good method. But I'll show you how it works. I want to get some cases of cancer pancreas. It's a rare disease, and I call my friends in Mumbai or Bangalore and Chennai, all the hospital, hey guys, if you find a cancer pancreas, please let me know. I'll come and talk to them. So I get 100 cases of CA-PAN. And I find out how many drink coffee, how many don't. 80 drink coffee, 20 don't. And I need some controls. For the time being, controls are people without cancer, pancreas, okay? The control selection is the most important thing in a case control study. And 50 you drank, 50 you didn't drink. A, B, C, D. You remember the 4 letters, my favorite one? They appear here also. And then I do this tricky calculation. I say AD by BC is equal to 80 into 50 divided by 50 into 20 is equal to 4. Yeah. If you drink coffee, your risk of cancer pancreas goes up 4 times as compared to if you don't drink coffee. Everybody look at you. Aha. Where is the incidence of cancer among coffee drinkers? Where is the incidence of cancer among non-coffee drinkers? No. What the heck is that AD by BC? And you get 4 now. Huh?
It's the odds of coffee drinking among the patients.
Huh?
It's the odds of coffee drinking among the cancer patients.
So it doesn't look very convincing. You're starting with cancer and see how many drink coffee, have controls, how many drink coffee. But this, to call it a relative risk, that looks shady. Okay? So people always look at case control studies very suspiciously. They're saying things like, whatever you do as a case control study, later you should confirm it with a cohort study. Or case control study cannot prove anything. What they are publicly admitting is they don't understand case control study. Case control study is nothing of that kind. They are brilliant. In fact, there is a branch of science called epistemology. Have you heard of it? Epistemology. That's the science of how humans learn. Our learning, that is the science of learning. And the only contribution epidemiology has made to epistemology is case control design. Because it's actually a new way of thinking. Okay? And I put a little thing into it during my lecture on Bayesian algebra, Bayesian approach. We'll come back to that because it's actually looking in a different direction. So I'm going to take the courage and try to explain to you why this is mathematically sound. And also, if you get the hang of it, you will find the way you think on any issue changes completely because this has got the power to change people. Okay? So let's go and see how. But to understand this, I have to start with a cohort design. My subject is the same. I invite you to this island and I enroll people who some are coffee drinkers, others are not. And I get 20,000 of these people and 10,000 of these people. And now I wait for cancer to come. Is it a common disease? No. So I have no option but to build a shack near the beach and start fishing. What else to do? Because this is going to be a long, long journey. After many years, I start getting some cancers, CA-PAN, non-cases, 19,984 to 9998. Now I better go and present it in a conference. I may not last that long. So I quickly analyze the data. I calculate the incidence of cancer among coffee drinkers, which turns out to be 8 per 10,000. And I calculate how much in the non-coffee drinkers. It's happened to be 2 per 10,000. And I find the ratio, which is the relative risk, it's 4. Now when I tell people, listen, I did the study, look at the data, coffee drinkers have 4 times greater risk of cancer. Is anybody upset? No, they like it. Wow, brilliant study. They'll pat me on the back and then send me to another island to do one more study. But this is straightforward. No ambiguity. Human mind can relate to it. All right? So that, any problem? You are just normally suspicious, right? All right. Now, what did I do? I calculated A by A plus B, which is the incidence of disease among coffee drinkers. I calculated C by C plus D, which is the incidence among non-coffee drinkers. I divided one by the other. The answer was 4. That is the relative risk. That's what I did. But I'm going to make a proposition. I'm going to say A by A plus B is almost equal to A by B, provided A is small in relation to B. You agree? Similarly, C by C plus D is almost equal to C by D, provided C is small in relation to D. So I divide one by the other, I get AD by BC, and if I do this, I'll find it is 4.002. Hardly any makes a difference. So whatever I've calculated is pretty close to relativeness. Okay? That's nice. So what's so great about it? Well, let's work slowly. First ask the question. I know what A by A plus B is. That is the incidence of disease among coffee drinkers. What the heck is A by B? What is common about A and B? All of them drink coffee. What is the difference between A and B? Yeah, you are dividing the number of people with disease by number of people without disease. Odds. That's what we learn. So, this is odds for disease among coffee drinkers. Similarly, this, C by D, this is also odds for disease among non-coffee drinkers. What we have done now is very simple. I told you earlier, odds is equal to P by 1 minus P. All I'm saying is P is very small. 1 by P will be almost 1. So, it is with odds and P will be, probability will be exactly equal, provided P is small. Is it acceptable? But because when you divide odds for disease with odds for disease, we get an odds ratio called disease odds ratio. So the story so far is relative risk will be equal or almost equal to disease odds ratio if the disease is rare. Are you okay? Now in comes an Eskimo. Eskimos, have you heard of? Where do Eskimos live? Antarctic. Antarctic, you have that black and white fellows walking like that. They are penguins. Huh? Arctic, yeah. Arctic, there they live. You know, the Eskimos have a problem. They are sitting on top of the world. Right? On top. They look down on us. Oh, those fellows. Okay? So they have a worldview which is different from ours. So this guy comes and tells me, Dr. JP, I am not used to looking like this. I like to look like this, from top to bottom, because I am used to that. I live on top of the world. All right? Okay. And he writes down A by C. What to do? We have to accommodate all kinds of people, even Eskimos. So what is common about A and C?
Disease present.
They're all cancer patients. But what is the difference?
Coffee.
Coffee. So A drink coffee, C don't drink coffee. So this is odds for coffee drinking or odds for exposure. That is odds for disease. This is odds for exposure among cases. The guy puts down B by D. Again, we ask the question, what is common about B and D? They are all healthy people, non-disease. What is different? B drink coffee, D don't drink coffee. So we say this is also odds for exposure among non-cases. And when you do the multiplication, division, A divided by, you get AD by BC. And this, again, is a new odds ratio. This is called exposure odds ratio. Exposure. So we have a disease odds ratio and we have an exposure odds ratio. What do you notice? It's the same, and you get 4.002. Hey, the thing is, this actually is a fantastic discovery we have made, because it opened up new avenues of data analysis. Look at this way. To get information on incidence of disease, you have no shortcuts. Or odds for disease. You have to have a population, follow them up, grow old with them, and then you get the number. What about odds for exposure? Piece of cake. Okay, if you get it right, set up your study, the odds of exposure is nice. You get your cases, see how many drink coffee, how many don't. You don't follow up anybody. Okay? Similarly, the control. But when you calculate finally, you get a dumb, stupid exposure odds ratio, which is of no value. For example, if you do a study on smoking and lung cancer, and you are a case control study, and the odds ratio is 10, you know what it tells you? Smokers' odds for smoking, lung cancer patients' odds for smoking is 10 times greater as compared to that of the control. Who wants to know that? But then you say, hey, hold it. Disease exposure odds ratio, which we calculated, is exactly equal to disease odds ratio. So now I can say that odds for disease among smokers is 10 times greater as compared to the odds of disease among non-smokers. And then he said, hold it, is lung cancer a rare disease? It is. Whether you like it or not, it is. Okay? So, the odds ratio must be equal to relatives. So now I can say, without any hesitation, that the probability that a smoker will develop lung cancer is 10 times greater as compared to a non-smoker. Now the point is this. We have learned how to short-circuit an entire long cohort study through a case-controlled design. Okay, we still have to work on it, but imagine if this can be done, what lot of energy we can save. And remember, in our world, lots of cohorts are moving through time. Physically active, sedentary, non-vegetarian, vegetarian, whole lot of cohort. You have choice. You can choose to take exposed and unexposed and follow them up if you are a lunatic and then calculate relative risk. Or if you are smart, you say, let the cohorts move. As the cases emerge, I'll pick them up. Okay? And I'll have control. And there, I have the exactly same result with much less effort. So that is the brilliance of case control design, because it does exactly the same job as a cohort, but more efficient. But to understand that, you need to get into a little bit more of a thinking. First, I want you to take out the case control study exercise. So what is the question asked there? Let's answer second question first. What is the second question? No. There are three questions. First one, what is exposure factor? What is exposure factor? It's important that every time you look at a study, ask this question. The number of papers that make a mistake and wrongly call a case control study, cohort study, and a cohort study a case control are many. The question you have to do is always ask, which is the exposure factor, BCG? Which is the outcome, TB management? Then you say, okay, what is the investigator doing? If the investigator is selecting according to exposure and no exposure, that's a cohort design. If the investigator is selecting according to disease, no disease, there is a case control design. So that particular thing you should remember. Hence, this is a case control design. Did you get your odds ratio? Yeah. Now, I'm going to tell you, once you get the odds ratio, you should also calculate what is called as a 95% confidence interval. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. And if you can do it, do it. If you have the calculator, it can be done. Now, computers do it all, but you should understand what it means. Because we have already covered the 95% confidence interval and the same principle. Any parameter you take, okay, any statistic, plus minus two standard error gives you the 95% confidence, which tells you where is the population parameter. That's the question. So that's the exact way to always science work. Now here we have got odds ratio, OR, and when you try to do a 95% confidence level, we suddenly realize that the way the odds ratio is distributed, it doesn't permit you to have a standard error. Let me explain. Odds ratio has a range of 0 to 1 and 1 to positive infinity. Okay, so that is not a normal distribution. It's skewed distribution. But nothing to worry. You just have to transform it to log natural. So even though odds ratio doesn't have a standard error, the log natural of the odds ratio has a standard error. And that standard error, SC, is equal to 1 by A plus 1 by B plus 1 by C plus 1 by D. So what you do is take log natural of the odds ratio plus minus 2 standard error and then find the anti-log. And there you have got a 95% confidence interval. Got it? Log natural odds ratio plus minus 2 standard error, find the anti-log. So you'll get upper and a lower limit. Would you like to try it? Can't? It's in your calculator, log natural, ln. When I first got into a plane, I was a nervous wreck. But you should be seen me getting out of the plane and walking away. There was a kind of a, as walked over as a victor. So once you do this, you'll feel, I can do that. What is the odds ratio you got? 0.33. And what is the protective effect? Remember, we taught you yesterday, 1 minus relative risk is into 100 is protective effect. Here it is 0.33, so protective effect 67%. You're getting a different number? 2.15.
0.1 to 0.15.
See, the odds ratio is 0.33. So the confidence interval should ride across it. Otherwise, there's not something wrong. Don't worry, you have the equation, you can work on it sometime, and if you do this correctly, you should get an interval. But why I want you to calculate is to teach you the interpretation. When you look here, you know there is a odds ratio 3.3. And from our X-rays class, we know that means 1 minus odds ratio into 100, which is 67%. That is a protective effect. Protective effect is 67%. But wait a minute, does it really protect? How do you know? Calculate the 95% confidence interval. And look, for here, you're more interested in the upper level. Is the upper level touching 1? If the upper level includes 1, above 1, then what happens? The true parameter may be 1, which is no association, no protection. So that means you conclude our study did not show any statistically significant association between BCG and protection against tuberculous meningitis. So, but here we are sitting comfortably where both the levels are below 1. So one thing you can say, surely it's protective. How protective? You go for the point estimate. The most trustworthy estimate is the point estimate, provided the upper level and lower level don't include 1. If it include 1, we can't be that confident. Okay? All right. Now, before I go on, I have to tell you some good things about case control study. Now, when there was this epidemic in North America of early days of AIDS, HIV, they didn't know what was causing it. Absolutely no idea. It's just that men mainly were losing their immunity. And they did have to study. What design will you use? You can't use a cohort because you don't know what the exposure factor is. By definition, a cohort study has a defined exposure factor. Okay? Even if you can't define in the beginning, you need some sort of characteristic to say a location. Okay? Framingham. And then you have within built comparison groups. High blood pressure, low blood pressure. But here, where do you start searching from? Case control study, the advantage, you remember I did the coffee and pancreatic cancer, and I did odds ratio. But I could have had coffee, tea, Ovaltine, Horlicks, any number of variables. And I could have calculated one odds ratio for each. Who's going to stop me? And that's what they did in the case of AIDS. These immune deficiency people, they carefully asked a lot of questions. What are the behavioral patterns? And they had controls. And at the end of it, they said, we got the answer. The first paper that came out talked about a risk factor for HIV. You know what it was? Those days, I don't know what they called it, immunodeficiency syndrome or something like that. No HIV. They said, it's all because of amyl nitrite. Have you heard of amyl nitrite? Good, you shouldn't hear of it. It's something you go high on, you pop it. And then it's one of the drugs people use. Sex after amyl nitrite is supposed to be good. So this guy thought, high odds ratio for amyl nitrite. Yeah, we nailed it. It's amyl nitrite causing this problem. Amyl nitrite, they said biological plausibility. How it went through the nose, went to the alveoli, made the T cells unconscious, and all the story. Then they realized, oh no, it is not the amyl nitrite. It's what they did after the amyl nitrite. Okay, sex as a main reason for transmission came out subsequent. The thing is, when you don't know what the cause is, the only design you can recourse to is case control design. What else to do? I had a friend who studied with me in Baltimore. I told you part of the story. She was against drinking and driving. And that was a passion for her. And those days, it was common practice for Americans to drink and drive. It's a free country. And they were proud of the fact they could drink and drive. And public health people had problem trying to. So her objective was somehow calculate relative risk. And from relative risk, you calculate population attribute. And then tell the congressman and the senator, listen, if only you can stop drivers from drinking, you can reduce the accident death rates by so much. Okay, that is what population attribute does. So she said, I'm going to do a study. So what design shall she use? So she said, maybe I should use a randomized controlled trial. How do you do it? Oh, you take about 200 drivers, randomly allocate, one half gets half a bottle of whiskey, other gets some lime juice, and send them all to the highway. Now, she was planning to do this in California, okay? The laws are very tough there. She would have been picked up and thrown in jail forever, okay? So she said, no, I'm not going to do that. Then she said, okay, I'll do a cohort design. Okay, how do you do that? You have lots of investigators, you send them to different bars, watch that one, 2 pegs of whiskey, that one, only Coca-Cola. You keep, not an easy thing to do, okay? Sometimes you go to tap and say, what are you drinking? Because the data has to be completed. And at the end of it, that fellow had 3 drinks and, he's sort of struggling to walk around and walking to the car, can't find out, you stand there and watch him. And she asked, what are you doing? I'm doing an observational study. That's ridiculous, unethical, right? So, she cleverly chose, no way, I'll do a case control design. How does it happen? Nothing. You take in the place where all the calls come. Along with the police team, she also land up there, in the ambulance. And what do? Measure the exposure among the accident driver. Okay? If you're still breathing, you can do the breathalyzer. Otherwise, you can borrow some blood. Whatever it is. Exposure to alcohol, no exposure to it. And you need some comparison group, a control. Who would be a control? Oh, just carry on for a little while, wait for the next car to come, and then you say, excuse me, would you be my control? And there you are. She did. Odds ratio, I told you, some 11 or something like that. Brilliant study. And that's, you see, First I said, case control study you can do when you don't know what the cause is, only design. Number two, ethical problems are lowest in the case control study because you're coming there after the event has happened. Nobody can blame you, you caused the death and things like that. All right, so that way you're pretty safe. The important thing is you should know how to design the study carefully. And that takes a little effort. Okay, so now I have to tell you some of the not so nice things about case control design. First problem is what is called a selection bias. I very nicely showed AD by BC this way, AD by BC this way. But in real life, how do you get it right? That's not easy. Okay, and the problem related to that is selection bias. But that's a long session, selection bias, and I'll try to shorten it and try to get a feel for it. I have put down a large table where there are cases and controls, exposed and unexposed. And this is the total universe, all the cases in the world, all the controls in the world. And the AD by BC is the unbiased estimate of the odds ratio because you are taking the whole population. No argument. But your study will be done by a small sample. And this sample gives you a small AD by BC. The question is, how different is the two going to be? And if there is a difference, that is selection bias. Okay? In a nutshell. So, I'm going to say A by capital A is equal to alpha. This is hypothetical, you can't calculate it. But alpha is a selection fraction, selection probability of an exposed case. From among all the exposed cases, I have taken small a. Do you follow that? Similarly, small b by capital B is equal to beta. It is the sampling fraction for exposed controls. And C by capital C, gamma, this is the sampling fraction for unexposed cases. And small d by capital D, delta, is a sampling fraction for unexposed controls. So that I have theoretically figured out. Now I have to examine what are how different these two are. AD by BC is a function of comparison with AD by BC will be a function of this term, alpha delta by beta gamma. Okay? Now the trick is this. You can never get a random sample of all cases. You can never get a random sample of all controls. You will have a bias selection. Some people come to this hospital, some people go there, some people don't want to come anywhere. You never get the whole thing. But that bias, you built into your control selection a compensating bias so that this fraction becomes 1 by creating a compensating bias. This is especially true when you have hospital-based case control studies. For example, we were doing a case control study on Haemophilus influenza B vaccine, whether it can protect against Hib meningitis. Okay? Who are the cases? Confirmed case of Hib meningitis, confirmed. either latex agglutination positive or culture positive. Controls. We are doing it in CMC. Everybody doesn't come to CMC, only some people come to CMC. How do I choose control? I need a condition similar to the child with a case who has come here, and we chose other meningitis. Other meningitis mean meningitis due to tuberculosis or strep pneumonia or whatever it is, known diagnosed. Now the idea is this: out there is a population where a child develops meningitis will come to CMC, and that potential population is my control. Cases I get, the control has to represent that. And what better way to have a control than people with other meningitis? This is very, very tricky. I remember some time back, there was a case control study done. All India Institute, I think it was PGI, Sanjay Gandhi, and St. John's. CMC was not part of it. This is a disease was acute myocardial infarction, admitted to the coronary care unit. And I was in the committee which was supposed to oversee this. So I said, I joined late. I said, how are you selecting controls? How do you select control? They said, nothing, no problem. Morning, the registrar goes to the OP and looks around and chooses a person who's the same age and sex. Now, who will the registrar choose? Frankly, a decent looking control, right? A well-dressed, So ultimately it turned out the whole group that he chose as control were of higher socioeconomic nature and on a whole of a higher cholesterol. And that study went on to prove that at least in India, cholesterol protects against heart disease. Okay. Now that is a sharp example of a case control study gone bad. So somebody once said, you want to do a case control study? Yeah. What do you want to show? Why? You tell me what you want to show, then I'll show the correct type of control and you'll get the answer. Yeah, that is correct. So the case control study can be done badly. In my opinion, violin is the most melodious instrument we have created, in my opinion. Okay, others may disagree. But have you ever listened to a guy who's trying to learn violin on the crank, that one? You will not last near the machine anymore. It's not the problem of the case control study, the problem how they destroyed. That is the problem. That is a hopeless study. And the only thing I could think of saying, how do I get out of the room as soon as possible? So selection bias is a problem. And so control selection has to be done. Principle of control selection. Don't look and pick. Have a random process. Number one. Okay? People like me who work in a community health department, we have our luxury of having all the cases. In fact, my thesis on this thing was a case control study on whether BCG protects against leprosy. How many cases do I diagnose every year? 500. What's the problem? Where's the control? I got a 300,000 population there. No problem. Everybody's name in my register. So that is great. But what are my friends in CMC hospital? They have to be very careful about selection bias. That's one. Number two, information bias. That is another big one. How do you make sure the information you gather is correct? For example, I want to show BCG protects against leprosy. Did I hear me? I wanted to show, okay, that's not a good scientific approach. I want to see, I should say, but I'm a student, I want to do a nice thesis. I want to show that BCG protects. So what should happen? All my cases should not have, most of them should not have BCG. My controls should have BCG. If that is the case, I'll get a small odds ratio, 0.2, at least 0.5, and then I can say 50% protection. So somebody brings me a case. Sir, there's a mark here. I look at it, and I know this is a borderline tuberculoid. I can see it, and I look at this. Oh, there's a dot. Looks like a mosquito bite, right? Yeah. Then the control comes. Same dot. Definite BCG. Will I say that? Of course. I'll say that. My grandfather also will say the same thing. We are human beings, you know. So difficult to take away from your mind that bias, that deep-rooted bias. Very difficult to take away. So you have to be careful. You should not allow these things to come in. Somehow make sure your exposure ascertainment is perfect. Tough job. We can do it. But if you don't recognize it, don't ever say, oh, I'm a professor, I know the correct way to do it. No, nobody knows. The older you are, more biases you carry. You understand? As you grow. So this must remember, because as a student of epidemiology, there's a story about a Belgian farmer. He was showing off his cows to an American tourist. You know, said, this cow, my black cow, she's wonderful. She gave me 20 liters of milk every day. So the Americans are very cynical fellows, you know. So what about brown one? That too gave me 20 liters of milk every day. But my cow, black cow, gave me beautiful female calf last year. So what the Americans say, what about the brown one? She too gave me a beautiful female calf. But my black cow, Belgian, went on, okay? She never get angry. She never get angry. What about the brown one? She too never get angry. Then why the hell are you always talking about the black cow? That's because of mine. What about the brown one? That mine too. That's bias. You can't catch it. It's deep-rooted. No explanation. It exists. And that is a problem in kind of an information bias. Suppose you are doing a study on, case control study on congenital abnormalities and something the mother has consumed during the pregnancy. Your case is a mother who has produced a baby with some defect. Controls are mothers who have produced normal baby. Now, one of the most hard punishment a woman can ever receive is to have a baby born with one defect. It's sad. And what does she do? She goes through a process of introspection. Oh God, what went wrong? What did I do wrong? And she relives her pregnancy again and again and again. And then you go with your dumb pro forma and ask questions. Did you take any metacin? 13. She'll tell you exactly what happened. Absolutely great. Easy to do the questionnaire. But you go to the mother who has produced a healthy baby. She's forgotten she has ever been pregnant. You ask any question, no, no. The husband comes home and says, one nut came here and just asked some dumb questions and went. Problem, how do you make it equal? There are techniques by which we now do that. You overdo it, you'll give ideas to people. If you underdo it, you are underestimating. So those are problems. So this is design, the case control, has its own difficulty. But again, sometimes we can blind the investigator. I remember a study we did long. I had this student of mine who was one of the nicest PG students I ever had. Like the description of the cow, he never got angry, okay? He was helpful to everybody. Anybody said, can you do my duty? Sure. I have never seen such a nice guy. And I was very proud of him. He was my student. And one day, he was sitting in the OPD across me, and he banged his hand on the table. What a dumb woman. I have never heard him shout. She said it. So he looked at me, stared at me, got up and came down up to me. He said, "Sir, can low maternal IQ be a risk factor for childhood malnutrition?" I said, "I don't know. We'll do and see." And that was a study. So he took third-degree malnourished children and normal children and measured the maternal IQ of the both. But the maternal IQ measurement was done by a psychiatric social worker. That person did not know who was the case mother, who was the control mother. Okay, because only the mother came for the interview. Now, if you can contrive that, some sort of situation, brilliant. Okay, so there is a possibility you can blind the investigator. So, now quickly going on to the concept. The word confounding is often mentioned. We are all confident to say confounding. But what is confounding really, you need to be sure of. So that we need to understand what is called the anatomy and physiology of confounding. And I'm going to show you an example. I'm going to show you a drug trial, drug and placebo, and you have got cured and not cured here. This is for men and this is for women. Drug, placebo, cured, not cured. Only thing is we need some numbers inside. Now let us look at the table carefully. If you look at the drug group, the cure rate is 60%. Can you see that? 60%. What about the placebo group? It's also 60%. So what shall we conclude? The drug is no use in men. Correct? Because both have exactly the same cure rate. Now, look at the women. Cure rate is 30% in the drug group. Placebo group also 30%. Clearly, the drug is no good for women either. Now I'm going to collapse these two tables into one table. Drug, placebo, cured, not cured. Now when I do that, I add up these 150, 300, 120, 180, 300. Now look at the combined table. Cure rate is 50% among drugs, those who had drugs. What about this group? Placebo, 40%. Definitely, drug seems to be working. The 50% cure compared to 40% cure. So here is a drug which is not good for men, is not good for women, but works for people. Right? What's happening? Huh?
There are 200 men who are receiving the drug, which is double the
Absolutely right. There are 200 men who got the drug, and most women, 200 women were given placebo. Unfair. Agreed. But so what? Why should it cause this problem? No, all your necessary factors are here on the table. Look at it carefully. Huh?
The group should have been distributed equally with equal genders.
I'm sorry, forgive me, it was like this. But you're there. She said it is different, and you said it should be the same. Both agreed. Injustice to women, you should not do this. But explain to me why then you get this funny result. For example, look at the other way around. If you had done only this analysis and not done the stratified analysis, you would have published the data saying drug works. But now that you've seen this, you know it doesn't work for men. You know it doesn't work for women.
Gender is associated with both the disease.
Huh?
Gender is associated with both the disease as well as action.
What it says is, the anatomy and physiology of confounding has to have this particular triangle appearing. We are studying the effect of drug on cure. All right? Now, in studying that, here is a confounder. A confounder is very straightforward because it appears only when we analyze for gender or sex. And so sex is a confounder. Sex to be a confounder, rule number one, it should have an effect on the outcome. Here it is cure. So this triangle should be complete. That arrow should be complete. If you look here, among the placebo men, what is the cure rate? 60%. Cure rate among placebo women? 30%. And what does it suggest? That men, by virtue of the fact they are men, have a higher cure rate. Period. So this arrow is real. Now, to complete the confounding, you need this arrow also. The chance of getting drug has to be associated with the confounder. And we created the problem. We didn't do randomization properly. So more men got the drug and less women got the drug. Consequently, this triangle became completed. And confounding takes place when there is this triangle appearing. In other words, the effect that you are now noticing is not the effect of drug, it is the effect of preponderance of men who are in the drug group, who enjoy a higher cure rate. Okay? We are being fooled by saying, yeah, drug works. No. It just says there are more men there. So that is the principle of confounding. But the table also tells you the remedy for confounding. Number one is this. If there had been equal men and women on both sides, we wouldn't have got into this trouble. I mean, equal number got it. That is true. In a randomized controlled trial, you can do it either with randomization or through stratification. That's number one. You can't do anything about the fact that sex has a bearing on cure. Okay, that's nature has produced. So you can only manipulate here. Or if you can't do that, you come to the analysis phase and do a stratified analysis. And then calculate a pooled effect, which will come as zero effect. That is the statistical adjustment. And there are many, many methods of doing that adjustment. All your kind of sophisticated logistic regression are excellent methods of adjusting for all the confounders. But in a case control study, we have one other option. You can match. You can match. If you match for a confounder, the effect of confounding disappears. Matching. And I want to mention matching particularly because Indian context. Somehow Indian guides are very fond of matching. They'll tell you, match this, match that. I think we are born matchmakers, okay? I have no idea why it is. I've seen people with matching criteria ranging from 6 to 7 in a thesis, and it's disastrous. There was a girl who came to me and I came to Vellore for a course, and I was talking to her. You married? No, but I want to get married to only a particular sect of Christians. It's called the Orthodox Christians in Kerala, you know. Only him but I like him to be at least 6 feet tall. Aha. That's fair enough. Should have either an engineering or a medical background. Should not smoke or drink. Right. And should go to church regularly. Now you look at this way. The probability somebody is a Syrian Christian, that particular Christian, is 0.1. That is 10% or less. And then he's also 6 feet tall, multiplied by 0.05. And that he has got some sort of degree like this is also 0.05. How much do you get now? 0.000. Like that? Approximately that, okay? And then multiply that by the probability he is not a smoker, don't take alcohol, and go to church, my God. I think he's never going to get married. Okay? And the point I'm trying to say is like that. You create matching criteria, poor PG is gone. Okay, he's wandering all over the place looking for a control. In general, the rule is simple. Match for age and sex as convenient because it's unnecessary information on age and sex. It's unnecessarily because age is associated with most diseases. So match away. We are not interested. Okay, you can't do anything with age, right? So knowing whether age is a risk factor, what the heck do you do with it? And anyway, looking at the patient profile itself, you can make out it's more common in this age and things like that. Similarly, gender. What do you do with it? In this study, they also match for locality. And that's clever fellows. The guys are doing the study this actually studied was in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, where 3 or 4 hospitals were getting all cases of TB meningitis. So what they did was, and all cases will go because the children are sick, but they would get to one of the 4 free hospitals. And then they gave the worker this say, go to the same village, locality matching. But that's convenient, okay? You're going to an area which is same, and it matches for many other socio-demographic features which are not important for you because you're interested in BCG, the BCG protocol. And then you match for, go to that area. This is the random number we give you, 111 or whatever it is. That is the house number. You start from there. Start looking for a child of the same age and sex. You don't get that, go to the next stop. But the process is random. So they found a method of randomly selecting a control without looking. Don't look and choose a control. But let's test this out. In the case of TB meningitis, is sex a confounder? Yeah. because male children are more prone to TB meningitis than female children. Age, is it a confounder? Yes. There's certain age specificity in children. What about locality? Yeah. TB transmission dynamics has differences in both in areas and in terms of BCG exposure. So they did wisely. So this is fine. This doesn't make you, struggle for your control selection. But for heaven's sake, when you advise people, in general, don't go more than age and sex and maybe locality, unless there is a very pressing reason why you should control for an important variable. Because we have got such beautiful tools for analysis, you don't need this.
Is time point important as
Huh?
time of acting?
Occurrence, yeah. In most cases it is. But it's a complicated question you're asking me. In other words, how will it change? It all depends on the risk of disease in that period. For example, if I am asking the question of dengue hemorrhagic fever, if I am doing a case control study on hemorrhagic, I have a problem with time as a big factor. Okay, so that is one. So what I have done is, in the other page, just see the analysis of case control study in a matched pair analysis. Can you see that? The matched analysis. Matching. Each pair has got the following pairs. You look at pairs. So it can be both are positive, both are negative. Okay, one is positive, other is negative. One is negative, other is positive. So the 2 by 2 table there is trying to bring that. If it's not clear, positive, negative. Control, cases, positive, negative. Put all the people who are both positive in A cell, both negative in this cell. Case positive, control negative, come here. And case negative, control positive will come here. And B by C is your odds ratio. So this, what is the message you carry? Number one, if you match and if you do a study with matched case and control, if you don't analyze in a matched fashion that you have done just now, then you lose out on information. Okay? It's not a good idea. So if you do matching, for heaven's sake, do a matched analysis. That's number one. This particular one, it rewards you with a much better protective effect. And 75% protective effect in a case controlled design is really tells you what is the impact in the community. In a randomized controlled trial, you've got a selected population. When you do a case control, you're in the field. So it is closer to the reality, what people are experiencing, than what a randomized controlled trial done cleanly and neatly tells you. There's a final question there. Do you understand the question? Look at it. It's a kind of contrived language, so do you understand? The question is very simple. Hey, listen guy, this will happen to you if you present a case control study anyway. Did you measure the BCG status carefully? Yeah. Are you sure you got it all right? Is it possible sometimes you made a mistake? Possible. So sometimes the BCG positive you call negative, right? And the negative you call positive, right? This is called random misclassification. and don't feel embarrassed about it. Any diagnosis, any measurement has a given sensitivity and specificity. There will be a few false negatives and a few false positives. You can't help it. The question you have to answer is, what is the effect of that on odds ratio? Luckily, we know that thoroughly. The effect of random misclassification always pushes the odds ratio closer to 1. In a this is called a random misclassification. And this random misclassification always pushes the odds ratio closer to 1. So if somebody asks this question and you present it in a conference, what should you do? You should say, please listen to this gentleman. Will you please repeat the question, sir? And you vehemently agree, yes, you are right. Mine is affected by random misclassification. But look at this way. You're already sitting pretty with the odds ratio 0.25 or protective effect of 75%. If such being the case, what would be the real protection even without random misclassification? Even better protection. So that doesn't make your study any worse. All right? So that is a common criticism from non-epidemiologists when you present a case control study. Could you have made a mistake? Could you have made a mistake? You could have also made a mistake in classifying TBM and non-TBM. TBM sometimes not easy to diagnose. Sometimes a patient with a partially treated pyogenic meningitis, you can make a mistake. But again, not a deliberate mistake, random misclassification. In which case, the effect is same. So you are in great shape. Questions? You want to ask me a question? The course is over.